Assalamu alaikum and welcome to a brand new episode of Mental Health Matters with me, your host Maryam Hilli. And joining me, as always, is our wonderful mental health professional, Sister Anisa Diab. Welcome to the show, Sister Anisa.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much.
Sister Anisa, we have a very interesting topic for us today. We're discussing overcoming anger and resentment. So the first question I have for you is, from a psychological perspective, what is anger and does it serve any helpful purpose?
Yes, it does. And I'm so excited to be talking about this issue today of anger and resentment because I think it's a very misunderstood topic and one that we don't speak enough about. But anger can serve a helpful purpose. And inshallah, we'll get right into that today about all the different ways that it can. But first of all, anger it's a God-given universal emotion that all of us experience at some point in our lives. It's also a choice in how we choose to respond to a situation. It can be an indication that a boundary has been crossed. For instance, imagine if somebody was stealing from your business or somebody that you trusted in your inner circle, your confidant, had broken your trust and was telling other people things about you that you had trusted that person with. Imagine if in those situations we just said, all right, no problem, move on. We need anger in those situations, right? To feel that, wow, a boundary has been crossed here. It's been violated. Something is not okay. And this way we can take action so as not to be taken advantage of in life. And so that we can learn these difficult lessons that Allah is trying to teach us. And it can also be a reaction to different wrongs, injustices that we see in the world, whether it's discrimination, mistreatment of certain individuals based on their religion, their gender, their race. Sometimes it's really easy to forget that it can be a healthy emotion to feel anger at some points. And it can come from a place of wishing things were better, wishing things could be improved. And I think it's just about expressing it in a way that's useful. And that is the key to channel that anger into a means by which it can be used constructively.
So this is an interesting topic because we know from Islamic traditions, from a hadith, that anger is an emotion that is normally discouraged. And it's an emotion that really wasn't exhibited by the Prophet and his holy family. So what do you say to people who believe that it's haram or it's forbidden to become angry?
Yes, well, there's no question that anger can be very destructive, right? And we see the destructive nature of anger throughout the Holy Quran, where we see the anger experienced by Adam's son Qabil, for example, when he murdered his own brother. And we see the rage of Shaitan when he refused to bow down to Adam. And we're reminded with these stories that anger is something to be restrained. And at the same time, we see how it can be transformed beautifully through stories such as Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, where he forgave his brothers after a lifetime of turmoil as a result of the mistreatment that they exhibited towards him. And in Surah Ali Imran, verse 134, it says that Allah describes the believers as those who spend in the cause of Allah during ease, during hardship, and they also restrain their anger. They pardon people. Qadimin al-ghayb is the word, restraining of the anger. And Allah loves those who do good. And so even Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam would say anger is the destroyer of a wise man's heart. Whoever cannot control his anger cannot control his faculty of reasoning. And this is true because when a person becomes so angry, they can't even think. They're not, their breathing is irregular. They're not getting enough oxygen to the brain. And so what's happening is they're becoming overflooded with emotion in that moment. And you lose all sense of reasoning. Like you're just reacting out of emotion at that point. So anger is something that we see as discouraged. And I think the main message here is not that we don't ever feel anger, but the problem is explosive anger that is intended to harm somebody else or does, it can be manipulative, can be abusive. It's just like if you have, a soda can and you shake it up really hard. At some point, when you open the soda can, it's going to blow up on somebody or on your face, right? And anger is sort of like that, where we can't help but feel it at some points, but by just suppressing it in, what happens is it can explode on somebody, and it can do so in a way that's the opposite of being constructive. And I think that's the main message that Islam gives us is, it's a matter of prevention. You don't want to get to that point of, disturbed fury and rage where it's being just projected onto somebody in a way that's toxic.
Okay, and when it comes to anger, people often think of it as a mental issue. Um, and those who are angry are described as hot-headed. But are there any physical effects that anger can have on you?
Definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of physical effects, and it's so important to learn anger management skills, especially at a young age, because we know that stress is one of the number one killers, right? Especially, I know in the United States and in other nations, cardiovascular disease, all of this can be brought on by stress, and anger is one of those big stressors that really drains the body. When it comes to anger, you find people can have high blood pressure, they're more susceptible to strokes, more susceptible to heart attacks. It really does wear down every organ in the body because it's affecting your central nervous system. And Imam Ali alayhi salam very interestingly says that he who does not restrain his anger actually speeds his death. So it's interesting that we see in the research today that being affirmed. So it's really critical that we look at this as not just something that's affecting our brains. Yes, the term hot-headed is often used, but it should really be like hot body, it's the whole body is being affected here. I mean, it's so important to engage in relaxation techniques, proper diet, exercise, and just connecting to other people to help manage this so that it doesn't result in long-term chronic illnesses.
In previous episodes, we've discussed like triggers when it comes to certain mental issues. When it comes to anger, how can we also be aware of triggers like for us, and also, how can we identify when we're becoming angry so that we can then manage our anger?
Yeah, great question. So I think what you have to start by asking yourself some open-ended questions and really making an intention to bring this more to awareness, especially if it's something you're trying to work on. So you can start by asking yourself questions like, what is something that's been causing me anger lately? What do I seem to be angry about so much? Trying to notice if there's a pattern. And also noticing where in the body you feel anger. And I think everybody has a different experience of that. Sometimes people might feel it in their ears, where their ears get really hot, or in their face, where their face will get really flustered, or on their chest, where it almost feels like there's pressure. So I think by recognizing where you're holding anger in your body, what happens is you can begin to, start to feel when anger might be surfacing, and just do some grounding activities to get yourself recentered just by noticing it in your body. And I think you also have to ask yourself who's around you the most when you tend to be feeling this emotion. If the anger isn't active, maybe is there something residual from the past that seems to be resurfacing that might be causing some resentment? Sometimes it's not active anger. It might be unresolved trauma, different wounds from the past that aren't really healed. So basically the goal of anger management is the following. First, it's to decrease the intensity of the anger, and then decrease the duration, the frequency, the general levels, and it's to keep anger from escalating too fast or beyond what would be an appropriate level to be able to function at your best. So again, it doesn't mean bottling things up because we don't want it to be explosive, but it's just acknowledging, hey, this is a normal feeling, observing what you're feeling. Oh, I'm angry. Look at that. Just allowing you to sit with that feeling of discomfort a little bit so that you can let it de-escalate on its own. And I think, yeah, it takes practice. I would say this is not something that comes overnight. You have to be intentional. It takes time to work on this. And it's really great idea, I think, to ask other people for their feedback about what do they notice in terms of your behavior when you become angry, so that you can work on that in yourself.
I'd like to ask you, as a mental health counsellor and somebody who's worked with Muslim clients before, would you say that there are any common issues when it comes to anger that Muslims have? And if so, what are those issues?
Yes, and I would say it's a lot of relational anger. So anger in terms of marriage, maybe it's being treated disrespectfully in the marriage, or not having needs met within the marriage, sometimes really abusive situations. There's, divorce, coming out of a divorce situation and dealing with resentment towards the other partner. A lot of times there's some co-parenting issues, just not agreeing on the way their child should be raised. That can surface. Also finding a spouse, dealing with the actual process, especially nowadays. A lot of my clients are frustrated with these dating apps, where in a pandemic, it's so hard to meet somebody for marriage, and they're using these like different apps to find someone, and just seeing these people aren't really serious, or finding it so difficult, so tedious. So there's a lot of challenges there. Another big one I see is in-law issues, and just the lack of boundaries that might come about with that, in terms of the couple wanting to raise their children a certain way, the in-laws wanting to take a different course. So, sometimes people are really reluctant to express how angry they are. They might feel ashamed of it. They might feel like, it's just too much to even talk about, because a lot of times other people are so used to themselves becoming angry just based on their emotions, that they've learned to suppress it. And they, in their own lives, people aren't really concerned about trying to understand what's behind the anger for them. They just don't like the way they reacted. They don't like the way that they stopped talking to the other partner for a while, or had to walk away from the situation, or just remain quiet. So I think the beauty of counseling is, like, we're trying to do is unravel what the underlying emotion is behind the anger. Because what's interesting about anger is it's not a primary emotion, it's a secondary emotion, which means that there's another emotion behind the anger that's triggering it. So it's kind of like, if you think of a volcano, right? The lava underneath the volcano that's been building up might be something other than anger. It might be bitterness. It might be betrayal. It might be sadness. It might be just isolation. And it could be a combination of all these things that manifest into anger. And what we don't want to have happen is for that volcano to explode, right? So you have to get to the underlying issues in order to be able to de-escalate this emotion.
Okay, so I have an interesting question for you. Would you say that anger is manifested differently between the genders or not?
Absolutely. It definitely is manifested differently. And the research shows this, that, and I think I will say this too, there's different expectations in society too, and on the manifestation of anger, and what's socially acceptable with men versus women. So, for instance, society today tends to deem anger as a more masculine trait. It's more acceptable for men to feel angry and to express that very overtly. Whereas women have the expectation to be a little bit more covert with how they're feeling, and to just try to hide it. But the research is showing that men and women tend to use anger just as frequently. They just express it in ways that are different. So, for instance, in conflicts, I see this with couples, that when an argument is occurring between a couple, husband and wife, the woman, she tends to get more defensive in the situation. She wants to be in the moment with the emotion and really tackle it head on, whereas the men, they tend to get sort of check out, and want to walk away from the situation and cool down and look at look at things on a systemic level and not really be with the emotion in the moment. So that can be really frustrating for a lot of couples. But, you know, we also see this difference in children. If you look at a child on the playground and the child comes home and says, Mom, like, you know, John just punched me in the stomach. If it's a boy, if it's a son that's saying this to the mother will probably say something along the lines of, well, you should punch him back, you know. But if it's a girl, you know, the response, at least research shows, I'm not saying this is everybody, but a lot of research shows that people will say, oh, you know, you should just ignore it, just let it go. Just walk away from this person. So you're less likely to say to a daughter, hey, punch them back, even though neither is a solution to punch anybody. Violence isn't the answer to begin with. So I think this creates an interesting dynamic when it comes to conflict resolution, especially in families, in terms of how everybody deals with anger in a different way. And it's important to understand these differences in order to be able to effectively resolve conflict.
Sister Anisa, what would you say to people who often consider anger as a personality trait? Is that accurate, would you say?
So a lot of people do say that. You know, I've had clients that say, like, this is just part of who I am. I'm, you know, I have a short temper. This runs in my family. My dad's like that. My mom's like that. And this is just how I am. I'm a hothead. And with all due respect, I really disagree with that. You know, anger is not an innate quality that we're born with, right? You know, babies don't come out of their mom's wombs, you know, angry at the world, angry at others. You know, this is something that's oftentimes nurtured. Like the person might say, my mom was like that, my dad was like that, but it's a choice. As we discussed earlier, a person has control over their emotions. They can choose how they want to respond. And, you know, I have some people come to me in their 60s and their 70s saying, you know, I want to work on my anger. I want to work on the unresolved issues that I have. So it's never too late. You know, it's not like you reach an age and say, well, you know, I guess I'm such and such age and it's too late to change now. Because the brain it has what's called neuroplasticity. So this means you can adapt, you can make new changes, adopt new life skills at any point, inshallah. Of course, it's easier to do this when you're younger. And that's why I always tell folks, you know, if you're younger than 24, you have a really amazing opportunity to right now build some very healthy habits, because once you become 24 years of age, your prefrontal cortex, that front part of your brain, is already fully developed, but it's still developing right up until the age of 24. So as you're beginning to adopt new skills, it's easier to make them lifelong changes for yourself. But this doesn't mean that you can't still make changes later on. And I think that sometimes people who deal with chronic anger have certain qualities. For instance, they may tend to take things personally a lot, which is something, you know, that needs to be worked on. If they receive feedback or what's constructive criticism, they may take it as criticism of themselves, and that can cause them to just fly off the handle and not be open to what's being said. And I think people also may have poor conflict resolution skills who are angry. They may tend not to be direct with people about what they're feeling and expect people to guess what they're thinking. And this mind reading thing it just doesn't work. We can't read people's minds in life. So it's really important to develop a skill set with which you can be assertive and you can express, you know, what your needs are, matter of fact, respectfully, without just expecting people to know what it is you want and you need. But sometimes you see people that become passive aggressive in terms of what they want. And just as an example too, I think with conflict, people might resolve conflict more by writing, like, you know, sending a big long text message is not going to help deal with your anger issues if you're trying to resolve a problem, because obviously people are going to assume you're adopting a certain tone. It's always better to pick up the phone and talk to somebody, or better yet, have a live conversation face to face about what's happening. Sometimes people have chronic anger. They not only have trouble dealing with conflict, but they might complain a lot. They have trouble dealing with the sense of needing control in situations. They tend not to be very accepting of certain situations. So when you are like this, when you complain a lot, when you're venting all the time, you also push other people away. And if you're pushing people away, it's like a vicious cycle, because that's going to make you angry. Like, oh, this person, why aren't they calling me anymore? Why aren't they talking to me? And then you start to think all these unhelpful things. Maybe they're jealous of me. Maybe it's just, they're too busy for me. So anger doesn't serve any healthy purpose when it comes to, especially being a chronic issue like this. Yes, from time to time, we're all going to experience it, but it's definitely not a part of your personality. This is something you have to take charge of.
And on that note of taking charge, so if somebody who wants to do something about their anger because they don't ultimately want to reach a stage of regret, let's say, what steps can they take in order to manage or curb their anger, let's say?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is this idea of the power of pausing, the power of the pause. Just because you feel something doesn't mean you need to react. Just because you feel something doesn't mean your feeling is a fact. The Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family, he said, if one of you becomes angry, then he should stay silent. And I think thinking before you speak is really, really important. I can't stress that enough. Not everything should be said just because it's in your head. Okay, I see couples that they sometimes do this. They think that somebody on the other end should just know what it is that's in their brain, and they'll just, without a filter, will say it because, oh, this is my husband. Or if it's, their child, oh, this is my daughter. I should just say exactly what I'm thinking, the way I'm thinking it, because I need to be completely honest. But the truth is, we all need to consider having some speech filters when we are trying to convey information. We need to think, how is this going to be received? What I just said, how is this going to be received to the other person? Is it even a balanced way? Am I making assumptions here in my own head? What am I really reacting to right now? Maybe it's not even about this particular situation that's making me angry. Maybe it's about something else that's been going on, and I'm just projecting onto this poor person in front of me. So, Imam Ali alayhi salam said, a moment of patience in a moment of anger prevents thousands of moments of regret. And I think this is one of the biggest steps, is preventing it. You start to feel it in your body. Take a pause. There's no problem in saying, you know what, I need to just excuse myself. Sorry, excuse me. I just need 10, 20 minutes to go cool down for a minute, and then I can come back and talk to you about what's making me angry. That is so necessary to let people know when you've reached your emotional limits, and we all have those emotional limits.
In theory, all of this is it makes sense, but putting it into practice is really difficult. So this is a question to you, Sister Anisa. Knowing what you know about human psychology as well as managing difficult people and relationships, do you ever experience anger yourself?
Definitely. I think that's an important thing to say, because just because you might know a lot about anger management or human psychology, it doesn't make us exempt from these emotions. I still do have moments where I become angry, and I got to be honest, when I was younger, before I studied psychology, counseling, and I would say even, as my teenage years, but even into my young adulthood years, I felt like I had a lot of anger that was built up over the years. And I remember feeling very alone, very isolated, very misunderstood. And I think what made it worse for me at that time was feeling so ashamed of it, that if I'm feeling this way, This is not acceptable. Islamically, it's not acceptable. I shouldn't be feeling this way. I felt like not being able to validate where I was coming from and accept the feeling for what it was just made it worse. And so I think it's so important to give yourself that space to feel what you need to feel. And so I've reached a point in my life where I can definitely see the difference in terms of how I expressed anger in my earlier years compared to now, where now when I'm angry, it's I just let myself be angry for the time that I need to be. So I'm intentional about it. I say, all right, what do I need? 5 minutes, 10 minutes to feel angry. I'm going to let myself feel angry. I'm going to validate what it is that I'm actually feeling and put it into words for myself. And I don't judge myself about it anymore, and I think that's important. We don't need to judge ourselves for having these emotions that Allah gave us. And, sometimes it's just a matter of looking in the mirror and, talking to yourself the way you would want to talk to that person in front of you and just mumbling for a minute. And then, all right, you got it out of your system and you can move along. So I try to act from a place now of being proactive rather than reactive, and just asking questions too of like, how important is what I'm angry about right now? Is this going to matter in next week? Is this going to matter 5 years down the road? If this is important enough that this is a chronic problem, do I need to have a conversation with somebody? What do I need to do about it? Am I burned out? Do I need to change my schedule up? If I have a conversation with somebody, is it going to make a difference? Is it going to change anything for myself? Is it going to change, the way somebody else is responding? Or is it indicative that I need to change something that's internally happening? Is this anger going to cause me to do or say something that I'm going to regret? And if that's the case, maybe this isn't the best time to deal with it. So one of the things that's helped me the most that I want to share with viewers is I think we have to come to a point in our lives where we're all doing our self-work, right? We all have baggage. We all have issues that we need to work on. And I think if you're somebody that does your self-work and you are open to feedback from others and you are really trying to improve yourself and recognize where your problems are, then if you are in conflict with somebody else and that's bringing up feelings of anger, you should be able to look at that other person's behavior as more of a statement about their relationship with themselves rather than your value as a person. In other words, if somebody wrongs me, is this really about me or is it about them? Again, if you're doing your self-work, if you're being vulnerable with yourself, you're taking ownership of your faults, you should be able to figure that out, because it's too much pressure on ourselves to try to be responsible for other people's emotions. We are not in control of that. They are in control of that. Anger is a choice. Happiness is a choice. Sadness is a choice. But the bottom line is we have to have respect for each other. You can't lose all sense of decorum and say whatever is in your head, because once you say it, you can't take that back, right? It's like a dish. If you drop it on the floor, it's going to break into a bunch of pieces. And yeah, you can try to glue it back together and, build it back up, but it's still going to look broken. And that's like people. When we just say whatever is in our heads without thinking about how that's going to impact somebody, sometimes you break people and you break their confidence and you break their trust, and an apology isn't going to cut it. The cracks are going to still be there for that person. So we have to really think, really take a time to pause, as mentioned earlier.
The Ahlulbayt are our light. We look to them for guidance. What can we learn from the lives of the Prophet and the Imams when it comes to anger management?
Absolutely. So, the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family says that when one of you becomes angry while standing, he should sit down. And if the anger leaves him, then that's great. That person should go on their way. But if not, he should lie down. So there is this process, right, in order to regulate it. I don't even really like the word control, to be honest, because again, control means you're pushing down the feeling, you're suppressing it. What we want to do is regulate it. That's the key word here. So, we look at this story of, Imam Hassan alayhi salam. It's a famous story of when he was walking around town and there was this man on a horse. He was coming from Syria, and he started to yell at the Imam and throw insults at him. And, Imam Hassan, you would expect, that he would probably just ignore or walk away and, or just say salam, but he did the opposite. He actually said, old man, I think you're, a stranger. Maybe you've confused me with somebody else. I ask for your forgiveness if I've offended you. If you need transportation, we shall provide it. If you're hungry, we will feed you. If you need clothes, we will give you clothes. If you're deprived, we shall grant you what you need. And when the Imam, said this stranger was just in tears. Like, I was just insulting you. I was just treating you so poorly. And here you are asking about my needs and, how you can help me. And I think, again, like, this beautifully highlights what we just discussed earlier about how a lot of times when people are angry, it's really about them. It's about what's going on in their lives and maybe their misconceptions that they have about somebody. I mean, when Imam Hassan reacted in this way, this man grew more in his faith. He actually testified that, you are Allah's heir on this earth, and Allah certainly knows where to put his representatives. So I think this is something, aspirational that we all have to try to be like that. It doesn't come easy, but when you can react that way, that's a person of dignity. And I know for me personally, what I've gleaned from the imams and what I've learned from them is to always treat people with your akhlaq and not with their akhlaq. Your akhlaq should be unshakable. It should be fixed firmly to the teachings of the holy prophets and the Ahlulbayt. And if you do that, you're always going to be finding success, because successful people are kind. Successful people are able to regulate their emotions.
Inshallah. My next question to you is about, well, I've got a teenager, and I know that teenagers can get very, very angry, and even children can get angry. How can we help our children, our teenagers, when they're going through anger?
Absolutely. It starts at a very young age. I will say that. It doesn't mean if you haven't done some of the things I'm going to discuss that it's too late. But I would say let's, start with childhood years, like we're talking about young children, elementary age children, to middle school. I think the fortunate child is one who grows up in a climate of emotional safety in the home, and an environment where all feelings are respected and acknowledged and discussed. And, they're resolved in a way that is, again, constructive. I think children, learn that sometimes we can get angry with those that we love, but there are ways that we can express that love that doesn't hurt somebody else. And so I think a wise parent will communicate to the child, it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel sad when you need to feel sad, and it's okay to feel angry. I'm here for you. How can I help you? So I know one thing I do for my daughter, she's 6 years old now, is we have like a calm down corner where I just say, oh, okay, you're feeling angry right now. I understand. It's not, comfortable to feel that way about not getting to go outside today because of the rain. How can I help you calm down? And I'll just walk her over to her calm down chair and distract her with something like, some fidget toys or these stress relief toys, or read a book to her, just something to help her de-escalate, but acknowledging that the feeling is there. I don't believe in timeout. I don't believe in punishing people, kids, for their feelings or any of that, or isolating them, because it just teaches them that their emotions aren't acceptable and they're going to be punished for them down the road if they express how they're feeling. But you have to teach the child how to cope in the moment. That's what people forget about discipline. The purpose of discipline is not to punish. It's not to issue consequences. It is to teach them. And so the best way to teach your children is through your own actions as a parent. And look, nobody is perfect. I mean, myself included. I, have definitely had my moments, my growth moments, where I've had to work on certain areas of weakness, things that I may have picked up, you know, in my journey of life. And it takes courage as a parent to stop and say, whoa, I've been taking an approach here that isn't right. And I need to change this and I can do better. And, you know, that's okay. But we have to teach our children, you know, the importance of first, you know, making sure that we're modeling anger as ourselves as parents so that they can visually see that. And also, you know, how to help them, how to help being present with them, being present in their discomfort. That's not easy for people to sit with somebody else's discomfort. It's uncomfortable to do that. But if you can spend some time doing that with your kids, you're going to really connect with them, and you're going to get to a point, inshallah, where they will really feel like they can open up to you without feeling judged down the road. And it's not easy, but if you put the time, the effort, you know, there's some really great books out there that you can read on, you know, childhood development. And I recommend, you know, parenting doesn't come with a manual. So we all need to do our own self-research on this and try to pinpoint what we can work on. And I think for teenagers, the key is connection. That is really the antidote to distress, is finding a way to connect with them, to make quality time with them. You might have a lot of kids, but you know, each kid really does need to have one-on-one time with a parent to be able to discuss what's happening in their world and what challenges they might be facing. So if you're seeing that your teenager is particularly angry, you know, you can't just assume, oh, this is just, you know, teenage angst, and I remember feeling that way as a teenager and it's a phase. No, you know, you have to take them out somewhere one-on-one. You know, I've noticed like you just seem pretty angry lately. And it's, I mean, I know sometimes you're in a bad mood, but it seems a little more than usual. Is everything okay? Sometimes they won't open up to you, and that's a challenge. And you might have to find somebody else in their lives that they trust they can open up to a little bit more, or to get a counselor for them. But I think the main thing is connection, and also you know, really trying to make sure we're modeling through our behavior what's appropriate. If you're shouting at your teenager, you know, unfortunately have some individuals that you hear of worse than shouting, right? You hear of, you know, there's hitting, there's violence involved, and that's very tragic. Obviously, you can't expect respect as a parent if you're not giving respect to your child. So it's definitely, I think, an episode we can do all on its own, inshallah, down the road. But those are just a few tips I have.
I really like what you said about the calm down corner. I'm so used to hearing the naughty corner. So it's refreshing to actually hear something positive that we can implement. But my next question to you is about parenting. So as a parent, sometimes it can be really difficult to juggle daily life and the needs and demands of, you know, the family, etc. So you can get really short-tempered with your children. You know, you might be busy doing something and they come to you and they want attention then and there, and you don't have the, you know, the capacity to give it to them, and sometimes you might snap at, you know, at your child without meaning to, obviously. But what can we do as parents in order to listen to our children without yelling, without shouting at them, or without losing our temper?
So usually when a parent is doing that, there's something else going on in that parent's world, and there's usually a culmination, a build-up, so to speak, or a snowball effect of different stressors that are creating this explosive anger, or this explosive stress that's coming out. So I think it's really important to, as a parent, recognize that it is not selfish to put yourself first sometimes, right? Actually, most of the time, usually hear the opposite, that as parents, we have to put our kids first. But if you do that, you end up with a very irritated parent who maybe, as we described here, just yelling and shouting and losing the temper. So I think, as Brene Brown, who's a shame researcher, talks about, she says it takes courage to say yes to rest and play in a culture where exhaustion is seen as a status symbol. And I think that is very profound, that yes, like a lot of people see exhaustion and being super productive and super busy as it's like a gold medal that people wear. How often do we hear people talk about like, oh, I'm so busy. This week I did A, B, and C, and man, I just can't catch up. And I was up until 2 a.m. doing this. And people have more of those conversations than, oh, I took such good care of myself this week. I went and I just did some yoga, and I went and got a massage. I did all this self-care, and I went and exercised, and I feel wonderful, and I really took care of myself this week. You just don't hear people having those sorts of conversations. And I'm not saying that has to be every week either, because let's face it, we have things that come up with our kids. Maybe they get sick. Balance it doesn't always happen every single day. It might happen over the course of a week or two. But I think we do have to really recognize that as parents need, in order to prevent anger from becoming explosive and problematic, need time and space to decompress, to find their center. And as parents, we have to support one another in that, giving each other that space and not guilt tripping the other. Oh, why are you going out with your friends tonight for dinner? I mean, the kids need you. They need this. Why, to the wife might say to the husband, why are you just sitting there watching TV? I need you to do this, this, and this. Like everybody needs, I'm not saying somebody should be doing these things all day, every day, but we all need moments that are going to help us, whether it's just a simple cup of tea to get recentered, or to be able to rely on a partner and say, hey, I need a minute. Like I've lost my patience. I've really lost my cool. Could you just help me out for X amount of time so that I can get recentered, because I'm not being the best parent I can be right now, because I'm just overwhelmed. You got to let people know when you've reached your emotional boundaries. So I think that's key. That's where it has to begin.
At what point does anger become destructive, would you say?
Anger is destructive when it's chronic, when it's frequent, when it's used to manipulate or harm or dominate somebody else. And this is especially, I think, a red flag can be in situations of domestic abuse or violence, where there's insults, there's threats to take away kids, there's violence even in the home. And so if somebody is the one who's on the offending side of that, that's an indication that person needs to get professional help. And if somebody else is on the receiving end of that, they also need intervention and professional support to figure out what steps to take to protect themselves, to protect their family, inshallah. And as the Holy Prophet would say, he said in this hadith, help the oppressed and the oppressor, right? So the companions would say, and how do we know how to help the person who's oppressed, but how do we help the person doing the oppressing? And the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family would say, you help by preventing him or her from committing further oppression. So how are you going to stop this kind of oppression? When the anger becomes to that level of domination and violence, you reach out to somebody you can trust for help, go to a mental health professional, get in touch with a domestic violence hotline. But the key is to take action, because Allah would not want anyone to face that kind of oppression or to be the oppressor themselves in that situation.
Okay, and a two-part almost question for you. So firstly, what is the difference between anger and resentment? And then secondly, in terms of resentment, I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's more of a lingering feeling. And if so, what can we do? What steps can we take as individuals to address the resentment that we might be experiencing towards someone? So rather than keeping in those feelings, what can we do about that?
So, resentment is different from anger, because anger is usually more active. It's in the moment. But with resentment, it's a buildup of perhaps many things that have created anger. And it's usually something residual from the past that keeps resurfacing. So it's persistent ill will, basically, and it's bitter indignation at being treated unfairly. And resentment, the thing about it is, it's like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die, right? So it's taking a poison pill thinking you're holding on to something that's going to help, but really you're hurting yourself. So I think, one thing that can be really helpful, we've talked about a lot of strategies already, and I think it's important to get to the bottom, the root causes of the resentment, so we can figure out what's going on. And sometimes that has to be done with a professional, because it's hard when you're in your own head all the time to see outside of yourself. And when you're anxious as well, it's hard to think clearly about what's really happening. But I think what's beautiful is, getting Sahifa Sajadiya. And I love Sahifa Sajadiya for so many reasons, but one of the reasons is whatever emotion you're feeling, you pick a dua according to what you're feeling in the moment. And I think it really creates a unique, special relationship between you and your creator. But in particular, there's supplication number 14 on the supplication of a person who has been wronged or has been shown hostility. And I think it's beautiful. If you look at the supplication, it talks about asking Allah to compensate you for any wrongdoing that you've experienced with Allah's pardon. Ya Allah, just as you have made me detest being wronged, also protect me from doing wrong. It's talking about how we might feel angry, we might feel this fury in these moments, especially if we're being wronged, but channeling it and asking for Allah's guidance in that situation. So I highly recommend that. And I really do recommend some bibliotherapy here. I think getting a book, there's a lot of great workbooks on managing anger, and the books will be divided into chapters, like programs that take it week by week. So please grab a book. Like, one that I highly recommend is the Anger Management Source book by Glenn Schiraldi and Melissa Kerr. But there are so many, and inshallah, if you find something that can help you along and just give you some affirmation that you're on the right track, I think it can be very beneficial.
Inshallah, actually interested in purchasing that book now myself. On the topic of forgiveness, because I know forgiveness is something that is really difficult to do, what would you say makes forgiveness so difficult?
There's many things. There's many stumbling blocks that people face when it comes to forgiving. And I think forgiving is really the way forward when it comes to dealing with anger and resentment. But people struggle because they think forgiving means I'm condoning the behavior. This is not true. You can still forgive and condemn the behavior, but when you forgive, you're choosing to release ill will and hatred towards the offender, right? So there's a distinction there. Some people think that forgiving means you have to forget. And I just don't think, honestly, that's humanly possible, because if somebody has really wronged you, usually there's some trauma with that. So you can't, your brain is not like a memory disk that you can just erase and throw in the recycling bin on your computer. Like, it's hard, but also we don't want to necessarily forget, because there might be some really important lessons that we need to learn from that experience with somebody that help us grow and gain wisdom, inshallah, as a person. And I think another one is believing that if I forgive the offender, they're going to think that their actions didn't hurt me. And this is just not the case. You can still make it known to the individual that this was unacceptable. But when you choose to forgive, you're not doing it for them. This is what people miss. You're doing it for yourself, because it's draining. It's exhausting to hold on to anger. It's about your internal state. So when you release anger, sometimes people will judge you of, oh, you're not loyal to me. How can you just talk to that person and forgive? But sometimes people think you're weak looking for forgiving, but we know psychologically that it's a strength. And nobody's negative opinion should discount that. It's a real sign of emotional maturity, where you can take lessons from what you experienced and move forward.
Would you say there are any practical ways, that we can, as individuals, try to forgive someone?
I think the first step is forgiving yourself. A lot of people tell me it's easier to forgive other people than it is to forgive themselves. Seek Allah's forgiveness and practice being kind to yourself and having compassion for yourself. This is the first step. I mean, you cannot forgive somebody else if you're holding a grudge against yourself. your relationship with Allah too has to be in such a way that you have hope that Allah is going to forgive you, and that you have the opportunity to enter paradise and all these things. Because if you don't have that hope for yourself, it makes it very challenging in terms of your relationship with other people, to have hope in others that they can change, that you can grow. So I think that's the first piece of practical advice I would give that's really important. And the second is to make sure you're healing, you're completing your emotional business as much as possible. And we can maybe talk about those strategies a little bit later or another time in another episode.
Inshallah, definitely. Why not? Sister Anisa, when people are going through a lot of challenges in life, sometimes they might channel their anger towards the entire community or even towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What makes someone go to such extreme lengths? And is there something that can be done to prevent this from happening?
So this is something I see a lot. And I want you to know, if this is something that you're struggling with, you're definitely not alone. And everybody responds differently in crisis, right? During troubled times, I think it's natural to feel sad about the death of somebody you love, for example, or if there's some sort of trauma or a diagnosis in the family of somebody going through a chronic illness. It's natural for people to struggle with their relationship with Allah. And after one begins to blame themselves and other people and fate, sometimes they get to that point where they begin to blame Allah as well. And they might say things like, it just doesn't make sense. Why is Allah doing this to me? How can Allah allow this to happen? And I think if you're experiencing this, the first step is to be honest with yourself that you are, to admit that you're angry and that you feel shamed and guilty by how you're feeling, but also be willing to admit that you're powerless here. These circumstances that we're dealing with, we have to remember that what is actually in our control is only a few things, but ultimately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one in control. And we need to allow ourselves to feel vulnerable and work through these situations. But what we need to do is recognize that our healing comes in play when we turn towards Allah and not away from Allah. The more you turn towards Him, the more you relieve your stress. And unfortunately, sometimes people feel like, they have this transactional relationship with Allah, where if I'm praying and I went for a ziyarah and I did all these things, well, surely Allah should be answering my dua. Why isn't Allah answering me? Maybe I should just stop praying. Maybe I should stop caring. And it's like, when you do that, you're shooting yourself in the foot, because Allah doesn't need our prayers. Allah doesn't need our du'as. We need it, right? We need it to be able to cope. And even you look at the research, talks so much about how those who pray in times of distress are able to move forward better with their lives and deal more effectively with transitions. So I would say that this is a time where you have to find support. You really need, and I recommend seeing a therapist who's Muslim, who can help you work through these issues, because a lot of times anger gives us a false sense of control. If we're hanging on to anger, it's like we are protecting ourselves from disappointment in the future, because we're not getting our hopes up too much. We're not going to be hurt as much, not realizing we're already hurting ourselves by holding on to the anger. So we have to let go of the ego, right? And you have to remove
the E and add the D.
The E and add the D, thank you, to make it God. Replace your ego and your pride with Him, and definitely you'll never regret, inshallah, being able to move forward, inshallah.
Inshallah. Sister Anisa, I don't feel like we have enough time with you. I wish we had longer, so we can learn so much, wallah, from you. Thank you so much. And dear viewers, thank you so much for tuning in today. We were discussing overcoming anger and resentment. Thank you, Sister Anisa. And thank you, dear viewers.
Thank you.
I will see you again, inshallah, very, very soon. Take care. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.